Hello and welcome to Conversations from the A&amp podcast. In this episode I speak to Augusto. With his wife they adopted twins, and he reflects on the challenges of early permanence and transracial adoption. As always, if you have experience of adoption, fostering or special guardianship from any perspective, personal or professional, and would like to share that on the podcast, please get in touch through the Facebook page, the app formerly known as Twitter, or you can email us at a&fpodcast@gmail.com.
My name is Augusto. My wife and I are a mixed couple. My background is largely white European, and my wife's background is Filipino. We have two adopted children who we adopted through foster to adopt. They're twins, and their background is British Black Caribbean. Yeah.
Oh, so that's an interesting combination of nationalities and ethnicities and stories. So can you tell me a little bit about how you came to adoption? What was your journey to the door?
So initially we didn't know anything about adoption, frankly. And it's the kind of thing you realize after you learn about adoption. We had a lot of misconceptions as well. I grew up in Spain, and the system is very different to here. And I don't know, I guess I just sort of assume that it's the same everywhere. In Spain, it takes several years. It seems to be something more for wealthier people. So we just figured was something we were interested in, and we figured we would have a biological child, and we learn about this later. Hopefully, we'll have like a bigger house, and we'll have more money because we'll be older. I don't know, that sort of mentality. So we initially, when we wanted to have kids, we encountered fertility issues, and we decided, okay, we should do one round of IVF so we can fully close that door, which we did. It didn't work, and we felt confident, okay, yes, we're not gonna have children this way. And we went to learn more about adoption. We spoke to a few agencies, and they asked us to wait initially those 6 months, and we did. And then they asked us to wait an additional 6 months because I have uh, pain issues, chronic pain that I was born with. But besides them not really understanding this condition, because obviously my pain didn't go away, it did help us because there is so much emotional learning that you need to do for this process, and it did affect how I view this. And one of the things I would change about adoption is that I would basically ask people to spend a whole year learning, because a lot of these things are not intellectually complicated, but every little bit takes time to process, and you do need to sit with it. And that year really did affect everything, and I do feel we were much better prepared than we would have otherwise. So it ended up being a positive. We did take it as a positive thing to spend that year, and then we moved on. Initially, we weren't going to do foster to adopt because, as you may know, there is this possibility that the child might go back to birth families, and of course, that might be a positive thing for the child, but call it a risk for the potential adopters. That seemed too much of a possibility for us. We felt we wouldn't be able to cope if that happened. So we initially chose not to, but our social worker kept sending us profiles of twins and of foster to adopt. And we realized in the process of matching that we needed to be connected to the story. We needed to be able to defend the story. I don't know, that's kind of how I always put it, to defend it, but not so much to anybody else, but to the children. We felt that way about their story, and we had to verify the process because there's a dish going to do foster to adopt. So we did that very, very quickly. From our perspective, it took forever. It took way too long, but
Yeah.
I understand that from the perspective of social services, it was super quick, and it was the quickest they ever done. So it was quite a maddening month. We learned about them about a month before they were born. And then there was all this paperwork and a lot of back and forth, and all these senior managers and people were getting involved, and so it moved quite fast, I suppose, for them especially. And we did all the training. We met them. It was a bit of a hiccup right at the moment they were born because it wasn't everything quite finished, and because we initially had said, oh, we were approved for 0 to 4 years of age and between 1 or 2 children, and so we had basically an empty room with a wardrobe, but we didn't have a cot or a bed because we didn't know the age of this future child. And basically, they were born on a Tuesday. We met them on the Wednesday, and on the Thursday, we they told on Wednesday they told us, yeah, yeah, get everything ready. So we got everything ready on the Thursday, and they moved in on Friday. So it was quite a hectic time,
Yeah,
intense. And but yeah, I don't know. It was as much as it was that it was hectic. We sort of felt always look back to that sort of time as in this sort of romanticized way,
yeah.
and it was yeah, it was intense but nice time to get the kids home and the little babies.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it is unusual to in sort of contemporary English adoption to have babies, but
Yeah,
the foster to adopt sort of opens that window. So, in terms
yeah,
of the risks,
yeah.
how do you sort of when I say risks, the risks sort of that you that well, it's complicated, isn't it? Because it's a positive for
Mhm.
children if they can return home to parents, but a
Yeah.
negative for you. And so there's these very two competing sort of emotions, isn't there? Wanting the best for the children, but also sort of fearful that the children are going to leave. So how are you prepared for that?
So in our case, it was officially the children were removed, but it was also the case that the mom was on board with it. So
Right.
we did meet her, and even though legally had no, it was legally irrelevant, she did approve of us as well. And that for us is the thing that meant most, the thing that really mattered. And I do think that for our kids, it's also going to be the thing that really matters, the fact that she approved. And of course, things could have changed. So it was still a chance that it wouldn't go the way it did. Like that maybe we wouldn't have become the parents. So it was stressful, but at the same time, everybody kept telling us, no, it is going this way. It did take 18 months. So it is a long time of a fair amount of stress, but certainly we didn't have the contact process. And so it wasn't quite the same as normally would have been in this process. So that's kind of one of the main reasons as well. We were able to
Yeah.
cope with that. But again, that's also another thing. That is the one thing I would change of this specific process because I do find the idea of being foster carer of this child that you want to adopt to be kind of dishonest and it's unfair for the whole triad. So I don't really see the reason why the contact couldn't happen in a contact center and the adopters or potential adopters bring the child, but they don't really need to have contact with the parents because the parents might be feeling that, oh, this person is just a foster carer and is looking after my kid, but they want to adopt your kid. So I don't, that's mainly my concern with it. But yeah, other than that, I mean, the process for us, it was slow, but generally,
Yeah.
and positive, I would say. I mean, I don't know, it felt positive in a way. Obviously, it comes with lots of challenges, and there's all the difficulties, and obviously for the birth family and for the children. But in a sense, it was positive, especially because it happened so close to the previous step of where we also try to have children by our own biological children, and and that process was horrendous. And the
Yeah.
process of IVF was also awful and it was quite secretive and we felt quite alone and we didn't really talk to anybody about it. Where with the adoption process, we were open with everybody and we were happy to talk about it. it was all in that sense. So it had that type of positivity.
Mm.
So we were supported by our own network, which we didn't really could have before. So it was quite a positive change.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got two questions, and they're both totally the different ends of the spectrum. So I'll start with the first one. I, I was as you were talking there, I'm conscious that lots of adoptions in the UK, or the majority of adoptions, are without the consent of the biological parents. So that puts you in quite a unique perspective in that the parent was they were on board with that plan. As much as it's still a sort of a very adverse experience for the children. So did that
Yeah.
give you a sort of a unique position as well, knowing that actually this was everyone was on board with this plan as opposed to just two parts of the triangle?
Right. I believe so, for sure. I think I appreciate that, as you said, that in most cases, the biological parents don't agree, and one can understand that. Um, but I don't know, I saw something somewhere about how for children, regardless of how you might lose your parents, even if you become an orphan, your brain is still always gonna process it as being abandoned. And
Mm.
because I get, yeah, the brain only gives a few responses to a whole range of options. So I guess, and I don't know, I did see somewhere about them being encouraged to also continue to push back. So I do have the feeling that I don't know if the people perhaps are also pushing back more, and otherwise there might be more agreement, there might be more people that would be able to accept this if instead of encouraging people to push back, they were sort of more shown that this is might be the positive thing for the child, but as well, yeah, if things were to change a bit with adoption, well, but not a lot with adoption and contact was have done a lot differently, and support was a lot done a lot differently. Perhaps the families could also change a bit that approach and be able to be more on board if it didn't really mean losing the child forever.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. The other part of the question was you mentioned your family, and I was thinking about that, and obviously in terms of your experience of coming from Spain, having an understanding of adoption through that context. So did you have to do a lot of education in terms of helping your family and your network understand what was happening and what the process was and why different things were happening in different sort of sequence and order?
Our agency did provide training for family members, and my wife's family lives in Australia, so they do speak English, and they were able to join that training. But my family, their English is more basic, so they wouldn't be able to follow it. So we essentially created our own training. It wasn't something formal as such. It was more of a conversation, but it was a positive thing because it did force us to think about what it is that we wanted them to know. What were those important things? And so it is something that I actually do often recommend to people to do as well, that regardless if your family joins this training, regardless if they read books, to also have these conversations as well, because again, like to think about what it is that is important to you in adoption, that any of the elements about privacy, about terminology, just about anything that matters to you most. Yeah.
So you then you had these two little ch children join you. Um, and that sounds like I mean, good to go from naught to one child is one thing, but to have two children, two babies as well. So that
Yeah.
must have been quite a shock to the system.
For sure, yes. Initially, my parents had offered to come, and because as well being adoption, we were concerned with attachment, and so we said initially, let's just wait a few months. But after having not slept for 47 hours, I texted my parents, said, "Yes, next airplane, please," and and they came. And there's these things that they advise about, okay, so if the child is crying, they should be given to you. This is going to support the attachment. So it ended up working well. So yeah, so it was quite a challenge. Twins is definitely a challenge. There's many things that people often don't seem to realize about the difference because it is two people going through these stages at the same time, and it has obviously lots and lots of positives because they definitely help each other develop socially, and there's a lot of development that they help each other and support each other because you see another person doing these things, so it encourages you to do it. And the one example I always put is that they one is the reason the other wakes up in the night, but then they help each other calm down. So they
Right.
soothe each other, but they're also the reason they wake up. So it kind of works that way. Is that I think that's quite the metaphor for twins. I think is how is how it is really.
And I mean, it does sound exhausting, but I guess that uh, it's all adoptive parents have probably experienced that sort of the shock of having this relative strangers in your house, and especially newborns. So
Yeah.
you're now 2.5 years in, and you say it took you 18 months to sort of get to an adoption order. That sounds like a long time. That must have been a frustrating or a
Yeah.
stressful sort of period of time.
It can be for sure. I think initially that this shock and it was an enormous change and our life obviously changed a lot. And we had several visits because they were premature. They premature, they're twins and the adoption and being newborn. So you have for all these different reasons you kind of get extra visits. So for quite a while we had basically 1 or 2 visits per week. And that actually was very positive as well, because you have these people, you're very anxious and you have so many questions, but you have all these people that keep telling you, oh no, you're doing really well. So that was very encouraging and helpful. But as well, yeah, it can then eventually um it becomes frustrating when you sort of want to move on with your life, want to start your life and things the bureaucratic side of things start to catch up and they don't quite move forward. The the most notable thing is the passports because we didn't know basically there might be like 10 lawyers in the UK that are the only people that knew that there is this thing where adopted children don't quite have the same rights as biological children. I'm an EU citizen settled in the UK. So my biological children, if they were born in the UK, they're automatically British, but my adopted children are not. So that was an error that happened basically in the process that the social services should have put forward for them to become British then. But yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a long explanation, but essentially it's that was the main hiccup that we're still trying to resolve now. So it is quite a process.
Yeah,
But as the lawyer explained, which is kind of the main relevant thing to adoption, is the fact that the problem is how the law sees what it means to be a parent, and adopters are not parents in their eyes. They need to be a biological parent. So it's quite a weird thing to not have been ever changed yet, and we're still with this thing, dragging this thing. So yeah, I mean it was, but I think the main reason we also kind of let it be 18 months from our end is because of that, because the mom being on board and everything seemed fine, and we didn't really have that much stress in that sense, and as well we didn't have the visits with the biological family, so it's sort of it just becomes your normal
yeah,
and you just live with it. But it is noticeable once the adoption order comes, it is this big weight and you can tell that
yeah,
okay, it's been very long. For sure. Yeah.
yeah. I hadn't really given any thought, and I know that the immigration service process, the legal system around there, are not they're notoriously unfriendly and unhelpful, and lots of red tape. So that that I hadn't really come across that idea that actually because you weren't born in the British, you'll have leave to remain, but that
Mm.
doesn't then it's kind of trying to connect these things together in what is probably very I mean there'll be a handful of children like that a year, probably, won't there?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Imagine that there's very, very few, but it is something that social service just didn't know about. Um, yeah, I mean, it was a case that, we said, oh, well, you do have lawyers. Obviously, it was something they should have looked into. So in that sense, yeah, that was uh, quite the error for them to not be aware of. But yeah, of course, it wasn't something intentional.
Yeah,
And as well, in both parties, not the lawyers, not the law. I don't know. We didn't meet the legal team, but the social workers and us. There's a government website that tells you exactly that. Like my biological children, it doesn't say biological, it just says that my children would
yeah,
be automatically British. So we just assume. Why would you think otherwise? So they and us didn't think to check anything. So it, yeah, I suppose. But yeah, it's been the big frustration for us because it has meant that we can't travel not just on holidays, but for them to meet family and all that. So, but yeah, I don't know. Hopefully, will be resolved soon.
yeah. I was thinking that yeah, these things sort of they do drag on, and but it leaves you in this. By very definition, you're a multinational family, but you're kind of locked in England at the moment.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. Well, at least it's a big city, so there's a lot to do. At least.
well, yeah, there's a little bit for everyone in London, isn't there? So that's good. But in terms of you being a sort of a multinational, multicultural, multi-ethnicity family, has that sort
Yeah.
of how has that played out um through your adoption experience? Because often during assessment processes, those are the questions that have been asked. Well, how will you promote a child's identity and their kind of the history and their culture? So
Yeah.
I have a feeling that it must be quite well unique within your household.
Yeah, I mean, visibility is for sure something that is a big thing for us. And when we walk down the street, if it's the whole family, especially, it's quite noticeable. We've got twins, and that already catches people eye. And these are cute kids, and they are quite bubbly, and they move around. So it definitely, in that sense alone, we already attract attention. But obviously, being all different ethnicities, and it makes the adoption more obvious.
Yeah,
And that is kind of the main element that we always question about the transracial aspect of the adoption, the fact that you are also already making a choice for this child that, I don't know, when they go to the park, an adopted child might choose to not tell the friends that they're adopted, but in their case, they don't really have that much of a choice. That when they yell dad and it comes this white guy, it kids would already be like, oh, why is your dad white? So that's already that. You're already choosing something from on the behalf of this kid. So it is something we talk about. But as well, yeah. I mean, you asked about help developing somebody's their identity. And I think the thing with what I think transracial adoption does is to really um, make adoption visible, in that because we talked a lot about transracial adoption in the process, and we felt that in our case, being a mixed couple, with our backgrounds, it was always going to be transracial adoption because you're not going to have a child that has our specific mix. But my wife background is Filipino. I'm largely white European. So if you say, oh, I don't know, like Italian and Korean, and we heard of a case, and somebody said, oh, that would have been an ideal match for you. So it does bring the question that how is that an ideal match? Is it, and then about the fact that they will look like our biological children, because then it's about color matching, not so much about this. It does basically
mhm,
then have this element of questioning adoption itself, and that's kind of the main thing we talked about. And it is obviously something we talk about a lot because the example I always often use is myself because my all my four grandparents have a different ethnic background, and then, but my background in the same, like cultural, my parents sort of had more this connection to Italy. So like we cook Italian food, and I don't really know anything about Brazil, for example, one of my grandparents' line. So, but if I were to adopt a child with my background, I feel like you would learn about all those four and sort of bring them together more actively, and you wouldn't really have made this choice. Like in the case of our kids, their mom's favorite food is Chinese noodles, and her background is Black Caribbean. But so you would have think, oh, well, let's teach them about Caribbean food, but that's not what their mom would have done. So
Yeah.
it is that difference with adoption and being raised with your biological parents that perhaps biological parents often don't quite think in the same way of helping a child develop their identity. So it is definitely that. It's one of that's kind of the conversation we are always having here.
No, that's really interesting to get your perspective on it. And I was really interested about where you saying, that there was a child who was Korean Italian. Um, and like you said, people saying, "Oh, that's a good match," but why? As you say, are we just looking on a child's appearance as opposed to their identity, what a child might or may not look like? And it does raise lots of difficult questions, and some of them don't have very good answers either, do they? There's there's
Yeah, yeah,
it's really complicated, but fascinated to get your perspective as a mixed couple yourselves as well. Um,
mm,
so your children are now 2.5. I presume
yeah,
that they're fitting well. Everything's going well.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, the main issue right now is simply that they move from cots to beds. So now they don't. They used to sleep through the night super well, which was something we always felt uneasy telling people because most people would have terrible nights and we were having just normal nights. But but now we don't. So now we are in the same boat. And but that's really the main thing there. So no, everything in that sense is going very well.
Hmm.
And yeah, luckily they're growing very well. So yeah, in that sense, yeah, all positive, yeah.
Excellent. And what does the future hold for you all? Do you think would you adopt again, or are you sort of quite happy with your little brood?
I don't think so, mainly because I think I already feel like an old dad. I'm 42 now. And so I don't think so. I think it's mainly this. I always felt like I mainly realized once we had kids that it's something so stressful and it gives you all this anxiety and it's all this weight that you carry. And that's something as well with adoption that you question yourself of what makes you so special? Like, why should you be the one raising these kids? It just puts all this weight that makes the process of having kids something not so joyful as perhaps you would have hoped or thought it would be. And that's kind of why I feel like maybe having grandkids might be better. But I think you don't quite have quite the same weight. So maybe if they want to have grandkids, I think I would be more okay with that. Like,
Yeah, and you are, of course, in the right in the middle of that kind of that hard work parenting moment. 2.5 is a lot of work, and I'm sure twins is double the work at least. Um,
yeah,
uh,
yeah, quite tense.
Augusto, thank you so much for your time, and you've given lots of really interesting insights into your experience, but sort of some of those broader issues around race and culture and early permanence and the system itself. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you.